I have enough context now. Let me write the story based on the title, the constraints from the repetition analysis, and the creative direction. The story needs to be present tense, urban, multiple conflicting voices, decisive action with consequences, unambiguously terrible horror, and resolved badly rather than suspended in ambiguity. The phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and I did what anyone does with a sound that early. I reached over, silenced it without looking, and pressed my face back into the pillow. Keisha shifted beside me but didn't wake. The dog didn't even lift his head. That was the first alert. I know the exact time because my phone logged it. And because I would later scroll back through my notifications with the kind of sick compulsive attention you give to the moment your life broke in half, looking for the seam, trying to find where you could have stitched it shut. The second alert came at 5:12 a.m., same tone. That one I did look at, one eye open, the screen too bright. Emergency alert. Shelter in place immediately. Remain indoors. Close all windows. Await further instruction. I remember thinking it was a test or a mistake, like that missile warning in Hawaii years ago. I remember the specific thought. They'll issue a correction in 20 minutes and apologize. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling you this because I think you'll forgive me. I'm telling you because I was asked to be precise, and precision is the only thing I have left to offer anyone. We lived on the 6th floor of a 14-story building on North Sheridan Road in Chicago in Edgewater, close enough to the lake that on quiet mornings you could hear the water if you left the kitchen window cracked. The building had maybe 200 units. I knew perhaps 8 of my neighbors by name and another 20 by face. Keisha and I had been there 4 years. We were not prepared for anything. We had a dog, a 12-pound terrier mix named Roscoe, and maybe 3 days of food at any given time because we ordered groceries twice a week like normal people in a normal city. I woke for real at 6:40 a.m. because Roscoe was whining at the door and because there was a sound outside that I couldn't place at first. A continuous tone, like a civil defense siren, but lower, more of a hum than a wail, and it wasn't cycling. It just held. Steady. I stood at the bedroom window and looked down at Sheridan and saw no traffic. None. At 6:40 on a Tuesday in March, there should have been buses, early commuters, the 147 heading south. Nothing moved. I could see 3 cars stopped at odd angles in the intersection at Bryn Mawr, doors open. Nobody near them. Keisha was awake now. She said, "What is that?" I said, "I don't know." She checked her phone and said, "Marcus, there are 11 alerts." I took the phone from her and scrolled through them, and every single one said the same thing in slightly different language. Shelter in place. Do not open windows. Do not go outside. One of them, the 5th or 6th, added a line I hadn't seen before in any emergency communication. Do not make physical contact with any person exhibiting respiratory distress. Do not approach. Do not assist. Call 911 only. That last part. Do not assist. I read it 3 times. We turned on the television, and every local channel was running the same feed, a static graphic with an emergency alert header and an automated voice reading the same shelter-in-place order on loop. No anchors, no live reporting. WGN, ABC 7, NBC 5, all the same graphic. I switched to cable news and CNN was covering something, but the chyron said developing. Reports of mass casualty event in Great Lakes region, details unconfirmed. The anchors were talking about it the way they talk about things they've been told not to speculate on, which means they were speculating constantly while saying they weren't. Keisha was already in the kitchen filling every container we owned with water. I hadn't even thought of that yet. She's smarter than me in emergencies. She moves while I'm still processing. I stood there watching CNN, tried to describe something they clearly didn't understand, while my wife filled soup pots and mixing bowls and the bathtub. By 7:30 a.m., the hallway outside our door had become active. I could hear doors opening and closing, voices overlapping. Someone was crying. Not dramatic sobbing, but the thin, pressed sound of someone trying to be quiet about it. I cracked our door and looked out and saw David from 614 standing in the hallway in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, his phone pressed to his ear, saying no, no, no in a flat tone that didn't sound like panic yet. Down the hall toward the elevators, 2 women I didn't know were talking fast and low. One of them was holding a cat carrier. I asked David what he'd heard. He lowered his phone and looked at me, and his face was gray in a way I'd never seen on a living person. And he said, "Man, my sister's in Waukegan, and she says there's bodies in the street, and the hospitals are closed. Not full. Closed." She said they locked the doors from the inside. I went back in and closed our door and locked it and put the chain on. By 9 a.m., we had assembled the information we could. Keisha's mother in Atlanta was fine. Whatever it was hadn't reached there yet or at all. My brother in Peoria wasn't answering his phone, but Peoria is Peoria, and he's never been reliable about calls. Online, the picture was fractured and contradictory. Twitter, or whatever it was called by then, was a river of noise. Some people said chemical attack. Some people said virus. Some people said both. There were videos from Milwaukee and Gary and Waukegan that I watched once each and cannot describe to you and will not describe to you because description would require me to organize what I saw into something that makes narrative sense. And it did not make narrative sense. What I saw in those videos was very fast and very wrong and involved people doing things to their own bodies that I did not know bodies could be made to do from the inside. The official language never changed from shelter in place. No evacuation order came. No all clear. Just the same rotating alerts every 30 to 40 minutes, the tone flat and procedural, like the system had been set to auto-send and whoever said it had already left the building. At 11 a.m., a new message came through that was different from the others. It said, "Residents of Cook County, if you observe condensation on interior windows that you did not produce, do not touch it, do not wipe it. Leave the room immediately and seal the door." This was from the Cook County Emergency Management Agency, and it had a case number and everything. Very official, very bureaucratic, and completely insane. I checked every window in the apartment. They were all dry. I checked again 30 minutes later. Dry. I would check them 9 more times before dark. Let me tell you about the building meeting, because that's where everything started moving in a direction I couldn't stop. Around 1 p.m. someone, I later learned it was Janet Okafor from the 11th floor, who was on the HOA board, sent a mass text through the building's emergency contact asking all residents to gather in the lobby for an information-sharing session. This was a violation of every alert we'd received. Stay inside, close windows, don't gather. But people were scared and confused, and the internet was contradicting itself every 4 minutes, and nobody in any position of authority had appeared on camera to explain anything. And so the gravitational pull of being near other frightened people won out over the instructions of an automated system that hadn't updated its language in 6 hours. Keisha said we shouldn't go. She said it clearly and simply, like it was obvious. Marcus? They said stay inside, so we stay inside. I said I'd go alone and just listen and come back. I said 5 minutes. She looked at me, and I could see her calculating whether this was the kind of decision worth fighting about, when there were clearly larger things to fight about soon, and she let it go. She said, take your phone. Don't touch anyone. 5 minutes. I took the stairs because the elevators felt wrong to me. Not mechanically, just the idea of being in a sealed box between floors if something happened. The stairwell was cool and smelled like concrete, and I could hear other people descending above and below me, their footsteps and breathing echoing in that particular way stairwells have of making solitary action feel collective. The lobby was full, maybe 60 people, which was more than I'd ever seen gathered in this building for anything, including the one time there was a small fire on the 4th floor. People were standing in clusters, some still in pajamas, some dressed like they were going to work and had gotten all the way to the lobby before realizing there was nowhere to go. Janet was near the front desk. The building has a staffed front desk during business hours, but today it was empty. No doorman, no concierge, no management presence of any kind. Janet was trying to speak, and people were talking over her, and there was a quality to the noise that I recognized from faculty meetings at the community college where I teach. The sound of people who are afraid and converting that fear into aggression toward whoever is closest to a position of authority, even if that authority is nominal. And volunteer and sitting on the HOA board means nothing when the world is ending. I'm going to tell you what Janet managed to communicate once people let her talk, because it mattered. She said she'd been in contact with the building management company since 5 a.m. and they had told her 3 things. 1. The building's HVAC system had been shut down remotely at 4:50 a.m. by a command from ComEd or from the city. She wasn't sure which. 2. All exterior doors had been magnetically locked by the same system that controlled fire safety, and she did not know who had the override. 3. Management had been advised by Cook County OEM to keep residents in their units and to, quote, prevent Garani, resident from opening exterior-facing windows below the 8th floor. Below the 8th floor. Nobody said anything for about 5 seconds after she said that, and then everyone said everything at once. A man I didn't know, stocky, maybe 50, wearing a security polo, pushed to the front and said he'd tried the parking garage exit at 6 a.m., and it was locked and the emergency release wasn't functioning, and he'd called 911 4 times and gotten a recording every time. Not a busy signal. a recording that said all available units are currently deployed and to remain in place, and that his call was important and would be addressed in the order it was received. Someone asked about the roof. Janet said she didn't know if the roof access was locked. 3 people immediately left toward the stairwell. I should have gone back up to Keisha then. That was the moment. Instead, I stayed because a woman near the mailboxes, short, maybe 30, with a toddler on her hip, said something that pinned me to the floor. She said my husband went to work at 5 this morning before the alerts, and he's not answering, and his Find My Phone shows him on Lakeshore Drive, and it hasn't moved since 5:20. She said it flatly, like she was reporting a parking violation. And the toddler was chewing on a set of plastic keys and looking at all of us with complete unconcern. I stayed for 20 more minutes. In that time, I learned the following. Approximately 40% of the units had at least one occupant absent, people who'd left early for work, for the gym, for the airport. The building had roughly 300 people still inside it. The cell network was degrading. Calls were failing, but texts were still going through intermittently. Nobody had heard from any emergency services in person. Nobody had seen a police car, a fire truck, an ambulance, or any vehicle of any kind moving on the street since approximately 5 a.m. The L wasn't running. One resident on the second floor said he'd watched, from his window, a woman on the sidewalk across the street stop walking, stand very still, and then sit down on the curb and begin his words, breathing like she was trying to pull the air out of the ground. He said he watched her for 10 minutes, and she never stood up again. And eventually, he couldn't watch anymore and closed his blinds. I went back up to 6. Keisha was standing at the door when I opened it, like she'd been there the whole time. She said, "And?" I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and then she said, "We need to stay in this apartment and not open the door again." I said, "Okay." I said, "You're right." I said, "I'm sorry I went. That was Tuesday. I'm going to tell you about Tuesday night, and then Wednesday. And then I'm going to tell you about Thursday, because Thursday is when I made the decision, and the decision is what you're here to ask me about. And I want you to understand the full weight of what I knew, and when I knew it, before I explain what I did. Tuesday night, the power went out at 9:47 p.m. Not a flicker, a hard cutoff. Everything died at once, including the hallway lights, which we could see under our door. Roscoe started barking immediately, that high, sharp bark he does when he's scared, and Keisha grabbed him and held him against her chest and shushed him. I found the flashlight in the kitchen drawer, one flashlight half charged, and my phone was at 31%. And I realized with a slow, sick feeling that I had not charged it since this night before, because I hadn't thought about what it would mean to have no power, because no part of my mind had caught up to the idea that this might last more than a few hours. In the dark, the building made sounds I'd never heard before. The structure itself, settling, expanding, contracting without the vac masking it. And voices, not screaming, not at first. Just voices through the walls and ceiling and floor, all the contained lives of 300 people expressing their fear into their individual sealed boxes, the sound traveling through shared structure, the way it does in concrete buildings, felt more than heard, a vibration in the bones of the floor. Someone knocked on our door at 11 p.m. I did not answer it. Keisha held Roscoe's mouth shut, and I stood in the hallway of our apartment in the dark and watched the shadow of feet move in the crack of light. No, there was no light. I watched nothing. I heard the person breathe on the other side of the door and then move on to the next unit and knock there too. Whoever it was knocked on every door on our floor, patient, evenly spaced, and nobody answered any of them. I heard this. 6 knocks, 6 silences, and then the stairwell door opening and closing. At some point in the night, I heard glass breaking somewhere below us. Not close, maybe the 3rd or 4th floor. A single clean break, and then a pause, and then someone screaming in a way that made Keisha press her hands over her ears and made Roscoe try to crawl inside my ribcage. The scream lasted maybe 8 seconds. I don't know what 8 seconds of screaming sounds like until it stops, so I'll tell you. It sounds like something that was alive and then wasn't, and the silence after is worse than the sound. Because at least during the sound, you knew they were still a person. Wednesday morning came gray and cold. With the HVAC off and no power, the apartment was already cooling. March in Chicago. It was maybe 38 degrees outside, and the building's thermal mass was bleeding out. I could see my breath by noon. We put on every layer we owned and wrapped blankets around ourselves, and Roscoe burrowed into the pile of clothes in the closet and wouldn't come out. My phone was at 11%. I turned it off to save what was left. Keisha's was at 23, and she'd been more disciplined about checking it, so we used hers as our only information source, checking once an hour and then turning the screen off between checks. The cellular network was now fully unreliable. Texts sent but didn't deliver, or delivered hours late. Twitter was loading about 1 in 3 times. What loaded was fragmentary and contradictory, and some of it was clearly not real, and some of it was clearly too real, and I couldn't tell which was which anymore. What we knew by Wednesday afternoon assembled from partial information. This was not only Chicago. Milwaukee was worse, Gary was worse, Detroit was apparently also affected, but we couldn't confirm that because nobody from Detroit was posting anymore, which could mean the network was down there or could mean something else. The federal government had issued a national emergency declaration, but the specific language of the declaration was not available online. Only references to it, only people discussing what it meant, never the text itself. FEMA was referenced repeatedly, but nobody had actually seen FEMA. National Guard deployments were mentioned for Cook County, but I looked out the window for an hour on Wednesday and saw no military vehicles. I saw nothing move at all except birds and one cat. I need to tell you about the window. At approximately 3 p.m. on Wednesday, I was standing at the living room window looking north up Sheridan when I noticed the condensation. Not on our window, on the window of the building across the street. The building directly across from ours was a similar mid-rise, maybe 12 stories, and on its 5th floor I could see that 3 adjacent windows were fogged over from the inside. Not uniformly, not like steam from a shower, the condensation was moving. I watched it for 20 minutes. The fog on the glass was shifting in patterns that I want to tell you were random, but I don't think they were random. They looked like something was pressing against the glass from inside. Not hands, I didn't see handprints. More like something large was breathing against it. Or many things were breathing against it in rhythm, and the condensation was forming and receding in a pulse. I remembered the alert, the one about condensation. Do not touch it. Do not wipe it. Leave the room and seal the door. I closed our blinds and I did not look out that window again until Thursday. Wednesday night was when the building started to split. Not physically, socially. I could hear it happening through the walls and through the floor. Arguments. Not the kind you hear through apartment walls normally. The muffled domestic back and forth that you learn to ignore. These were louder and sharper, and some of them were about leaving, and some of them were about staying. And at least 2 of them involved what sounded like furniture being moved against doors, though I couldn't tell if the furniture was being placed to keep something out or to keep someone in. At some point, 2 a.m., maybe 3, I heard a door in our hallway open and footsteps moving fast toward the stairwell, and then another door opening, and a voice I recognized has David saying, "Don't, brother, don't go down there," and the footsteps stopped, and there was a conversation I couldn't make out, and then both doors closed again, and it was quiet for a while. I lay in bed next to Keisha, both of us awake, both of us pretending we might sleep. Roscoe was between us, trembling faintly the way he does during thunderstorms. Keisha said, very quietly, like she was talking to the ceiling, more than to me, if we'd left when the first alert came. If we'd just gotten in the car and driven south. If you'd woken me up at 4:47. She wasn't accusing, she was calculating. Running the scenario. I'd been running it too, for hours. And every time I ran it, I arrived at the same place. If I had woken up at 4:47, if I had read the alert and taken it seriously, if I had shaken her awake and said, "We're leaving right now," we could have been on I-57 heading south before 5:30 a.m., before whatever happened on the streets happened, before the roads filled with stopped cars, before the magnetic locks engaged on our building. We could be in Champaign. We could be in her mother's house in Atlanta. We could be anywhere that wasn't this building that was getting colder and quieter in ways that meant fewer people were making noise. And I didn't know if that was because they were conserving energy or because they couldn't make noise anymore. I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not blaming you." I said, "I know." She said, "I need you to hear me say that I'm not blaming you, because if we don't get out of this, I need you to know that." And the way she said it, it told me that she had already started thinking about the possibility that we wouldn't, and that she was organizing her emotional affairs the way people do when they think the window for saying important things might be closing. Thursday morning, the last morning that was still a morning in any meaningful sense. I turned my phone on at 7 a.m., 6% battery. One text had come through from my brother in Peoria, sent at 4:12 a.m. "Hey man, we're okay here. It's not everywhere, just the lake cities. I think downstate is fine. Can you get south? Don't go toward the lake, whatever you do." I showed Keisha. She read it twice. She said, "South means the lobby. South means outside. South means through whatever is between us and a car." I said, "What if we don't go south? What if we go up? The roof," she said, "and then what?" I didn't have an answer. The roof was just up. just away from the lower floors where the glass had broken and the screaming had come from. But up leads nowhere without rescue coming from above, and no one had mentioned helicopters and the sky was silent. At 8 a.m. on Thursday, the fire alarm went off. Not the gentle ping of a drill, the full building alarm, the one that vibrates in your molars, designed to be impossible to ignore. It ran for 45 seconds and then cut out sharply, as if someone had manually killed it. In the silence after, I heard doors opening, many doors, more than I'd heard at any point in the past 2 days. People were entering the hallway. Keisha said no. She said it like a wall. She said, "We are not going out there." I agreed. We stayed. The sounds in the hallway continued. Movement. Voices, the stairwell door opening and closing repeatedly. Someone ran past our door heading toward the stairwell, and their breathing was wrong, too fast and too wet, like they were running with fluid in their lungs, and then they were past and gone, and the stairwell door banged shut. 30 minutes later, David knocked on our door and said our names. Marcus. Keisha. I know you're in there. I need to tell you something. His voice was calm and hoarse, and I opened the door because I knew his voice, and because he'd been our neighbor for 4 years, and because I am not. Despite what happened next, someone who can listen to a man I know standing outside my door and asking for help and do nothing. He was dressed for outside. Coat, boots, a scarf wrapped around his lower face. He was holding a crowbar. He said a group was going down. 15 people, maybe 20, from floors 6 through 9. They were going to the lobby, and if the doors were still magnetically locked, they were going to break the glass and they were going to walk south. Not drive, walk, because the streets were impassable with stopped cars, and try to make it to the metro station at Ravenswood, which was 3 miles away, and someone in the group had heard that Metro was running an evacuation train south from there. I said, "Who told you that about the train?" He said, "A woman on 9, she got a text from her cousin who works for Metro." I said, "When did she get that text?" He hesitated. Then he said, "Yesterday." I said, "David, yesterday was 24 hours ago. The train might not be running anymore." He said, "Maybe. But this building is getting colder, and the water stopped working 2 hours ago, and I don't know what's on the floors below us, and I am not going to sit in my apartment and freeze in the dark waiting for something to come up the stairs. I am leaving. I came to tell you because you've been good neighbors, and I want you to come with us." Keisha was behind me. She said, "David, what happened this morning? Why did the alarm go off?" He said, "Someone on 3 pulled it, we think. We don't know why. Some people went down to check, and he stopped." He adjusted the scarf over his face. He said, "The 3rd floor hallway is wrong. I didn't go myself. Terrence from 804 went down and came back up, and he said the walls are wet and it smells like..." He stopped again. He said, "I don't know what it smells like." Terrence said it smells like breathing. The walls are wet and it smells like breathing. He couldn't explain it better than that, and I didn't ask him to because I don't think I want to know more. I looked at Keisha. She was looking at me. I have known this woman for 11 years, and I can read her face the way I read English, and her face was saying, "This is the moment. Decide." And under that, "You owe me a decision because the last time there was a decision to make, you silenced your phone and went back to sleep." I said, "We'll come. 20 minutes to pack." We put on every warm layer. I put Roscoe in his carrier bag because he wouldn't walk in chaos, and I needed my hands free. Keisha took the backpack with water and the remaining food, 4 granola bars, a bag of almonds, 2 apples. My phone was at 4%, and I turned it off because 4% was an emergency, and I didn't know what the emergency would be yet. Her phone was at 9%, and she put it in her inner coat pocket against her body to keep the battery warm. We entered the hallway at 8:55 a.m. It was dark. The emergency lighting had died sometime Wednesday night, and cold, maybe 40 degrees, and it smelled different than it should have. Not bad exactly. Organic, like a greenhouse in winter, that damp green smell of living things in cold air, except there was nothing green growing in this concrete hallway. There were already 8 or 9 people gathered near the stairwell. David, a couple I recognized from 608, young, maybe late 20s, the man carrying a laptop bag for some reason that I found irrationally upsetting. A woman alone with a rolling suitcase. Terrence from 8, who was large and visibly agitated and kept wiping his hands on his pants. Others I didn't know. We took the stairs down. David led. I was in the middle of the group with Keisha directly in front of me and Roscoe's carrier, bag on my shoulder, and the dog was silent, which scared me more than barking would have because Roscoe is never silent when he's being carried. 6th floor to 5th, normal. The stairwell was cold and echoey, and our footsteps made that flat, slapping sound on concrete, and no one spoke. 5th to 4th, the smell changed. That greenhouse smell intensified, and there was moisture on the handrail. I touched it before I thought not to. Just my hand reaching for the rail as it always does on stairs, automatic, and the rail was wet, not dripping, filmed, like the inside of a mouth. I jerked my hand back and wiped it on my coat and said, "Don't touch the railing," and the message passed up and down the line. Fourth to third. David stopped. Everyone stopped. From below us, from the landing between 3 and 2, there was a sound, not a voice, not mechanical. Something between a breath and a whistle, rhythmic like a sleeping animal, but too large. The sound you'd hear if you put your ear against the chest of something the size of a room and it was breathing slowly and patiently and not at all concerned about being heard. David turned and looked at the group, and I could see his face in the gray light from the stairwell's small window, and his expression was asking a question he couldn't form into words. Do we keep going? The group was silent, and then Terrence, who had been to the third floor already and come back, said quietly, "It wasn't doing that before. It's gotten bigger." The woman with the rolling suitcase said, "We can't stay up there and die." She was right. There was no future above us. Only cold and dark and diminishing resources, and whatever was filling the lower floors filling them upward, floor by floor, the way water rises. I understood this, and I think everyone in that stairwell understood it at the same time, the collective recognition that the only options were through or inside. David started down again. We followed. The sound got louder. The air got warmer, noticeably dramatically warmer and wetter. By the time we reached the third floor landing, it was like walking into a different climate. My glasses fogged. Keisha's hand found mine and squeezed so hard I felt the bones shift. The third floor door was closed. I could see, under the door, that the hallway lights on 3 were on. A faint glow, not electric white, more amber, more like the color of light through skin when you hold a flashlight against your hand. And the door was sweating. Condensation ran down its surface in rivulets that caught that amber underglow and looked for all the world like the door was crying in the wrong. Color, we went past it, past 3, down toward 2. The breathing sound was everywhere now, not below us, all around us, resonant in the concrete itself, as if the structure of the building was participating. Second floor landing. The stairwell window was fogged completely opaque from the inside, and as I passed it, I know I saw this, I am not inventing this. I have told 4 different intake counselors this same detail, and I will tell you the same. The fog on the inside of that window moved in response to our passing. It pressed outward, toward us, like something on the other side of the glass was trying to touch us through it, and the glass flexed. Safety glass, tempered, rated for fire egress. It flexed like a membrane. The woman with the rolling suitcase made a sound and started moving faster, the suitcase banging against each step, and David said, "Steady, steady, keep together." And his voice was the only thing keeping us from running, because running in a dark stairwell with 20 people is how people fall and die, and David knew this, and his calm was a conscious act of will that I will be grateful for until the day I die. Ground floor, the door to the lobby. David put his hand on the push bar and looked back at us. He said, "When we go through, we go straight for the front entrance. If the doors are locked, we break the glass. Everyone stay together. Nobody stops. Nobody goes back." He pushed the door open. The lobby was warm. Wet warm. Tropical. The front desk was unmanned and dry and normal looking. The male alcove was normal. The elevator doors were closed and dark. But the floor was wet. A thin film of moisture perfectly even, as if the entire surface had been breathed on by something enormous. And in the moisture I could see marks. Not footprints. Drag marks. Long parallel lines leading from the hallway that connected to the parking garage, leading across the lobby, leading toward the stairwell door on the opposite side. The east stairwell. Not the one we'd come down. Something had been pulled across this floor, or multiple somethings, or someone had dragged themselves. And there was a woman sitting in one of the lobby chairs by the window, sitting upright, coat on, purse in her lap like she was waiting for a taxi. I recognized her. Mrs. Adebayo from the 10th floor, elderly Nigerian, always impeccably dressed, always smiled at Roscoe in the elevator. She was sitting perfectly still, and her eyes were open, and her mouth was open, and she was producing that breathing sound. Not her alone, she was part of it, contributing to it, one instrument in an orchestra that was also playing elsewhere in the building, and her breath was visible in the warm air as a faint mist that left her mouth and didn't rise. It hung in front of her face in a small cloud, and it was the same amber color as the light under the third floor door. David said, "Don't look at her. Keep moving." The man with the laptop bag stopped. He said, I know her. She lives on my floor, is she?" David said, "Keep moving." But the man wasn't moving. He was looking at Mrs. Adebayo, and his face was doing something I can only describe as softening in a direction faces shouldn't soften, like the muscles under his skin were deciding, one by one, to release. His girlfriend or wife pulled his arm and said, "Baby, come on, come on." And he took a step toward Mrs. Adebayo, and I saw his face, and I understood something about what was happening in this building that I hadn't understood from above, insulated by 6 floors of concrete. She was not in distress. Mrs. Adebayo was not suffering. Her eyes were open and her face was peaceful, and the sound she was making was not labored or pained. It was continuous and easy, and she looked, I need to say this precisely, she looked like someone experiencing something that made everything else irrelevant. She looked like someone who had found the frequency she'd been looking for her entire life and was now broadcasting it without effort. And the man from 608 was responding to that broadcast. His body was orienting toward her the way a plant orients toward light. His girlfriend was pulling, and he wasn't resisting, he just wasn't moving with her. He was listening with his entire body. This is when I made the decision. Not the decision you want to ask me about. That comes later. This was a smaller decision, but it was connected to the larger one the way a root is connected to what eventually grows from it. I grabbed the man. I grabbed his arm and I pulled. Hard. I am not a large person, but I pulled with everything I had and I said, "We are leaving right now," and I dragged him 3 steps toward the front entrance, and his girlfriend got his other arm. And between us, we moved him, and his legs worked fine. His body was obedient. He just wouldn't have chosen to use it in that direction on his own. David was at the front doors. He pushed. Locked. The magnetic locks were still engaged. He wedged the crowbar into the seam between the double doors and levered, and the glass cracked, but the lock held, and he levered again, harder, and the frame deformed and the lock mechanism tore free from the aluminum housing, and the door swung outward, and cold air hit us like a wall, 35 degrees, lake wind, brutal and clean, and I took my first breath of outside air in 50 hours. And it tasted like nothing, like absolutely nothing. The absence of that warm, wet organic air was so sharp it felt like being slapped awake. We moved out onto Sheridan. 22 people, blinking in gray daylight on a road that was empty of all moving life. Cars everywhere, stopped, doors open, but no people. No sound except wind and birds, and somewhere far away a car alarm that had been going long enough that its battery was failing and the tone was dropping in pitch. David said, "South, stay together, middle of the road, move fast." We moved south. I'm going to compress what happened between the building and the Ravenswood station, because most of it was walking and fear, and because the details that matter are limited. The streets were not empty of people. They were empty of moving people. I counted 17 people between our building and the station. All of them were sitting or standing still. All of them were breathing that breath. All of them had that amber mist hanging around their faces like personal weather. They were on sidewalks, on benches, one in the middle of an intersection, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt like a meditating monk. They were not aggressive. They did not reach for us or call to us or even look at us as we passed. But 3 of them turned their heads as we passed, slowly, the way surveillance cameras pan. And the breathing sound, which we could hear from each of them as we got close, synchronized as we moved through their scattered geography, like we were moving through an instrument, and the notes were responding to our presence. We lost 2 people between the building and the station. The couple from 608, the man I'd pulled away from Mrs. Adebayo. 6 blocks south, he stopped walking. His girlfriend was holding his hand, and she felt him stop. And she turned, and his face had that softening again. And he said, "It's okay." She said, "No." He said, "It's okay. It's not bad. It's not what you think." She said, "Please." And she was crying and pulling his hand, and he let go of her hand, and he sat down on the curb the way you'd sit down to rest after a long walk, easy, relieved, and his breathing changed. I watched it change. One breath he was breathing the way we were breathing, fast, scared, thin in the cold air, and the next breath was deeper and slower and came out amber. His girlfriend screamed his name. Jason. She screamed it 3 times. He didn't look at her. He was already somewhere else. Not unconscious, his eyes were open and aware, but aware of something other than us. Like we'd become the background noise, and whatever was real to him was now on a frequency we couldn't hear. David said, "Leave him. We can't carry him." The girlfriend, Andrea, I later learned, said, "I'm not leaving him." David said, "Then you're staying too." She stayed. She sat down next to Jason on the curb and took his hand again and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, and I don't know what happened to them after that. I don't know if she joined him or if she sat there beside him until exposure killed her, or if she eventually got up and walked somewhere alone. I don't know. I carry that not knowing like a physical weight in my chest, because I could have stayed and argued and pulled and insisted, but I didn't, because David said move, and I moved because my wife was alive beside me, and my dog was alive in his bag, and the living have a gravity that only works if you don't look back at the dying. We reached the Metra station at Ravenswood at approximately 10:40 a.m. There was a train on the track. It was running, I could hear the engine, see the exhaust. There were maybe 40 people already on the platform, looking roughly the way we looked. Coated, layered, carrying bags, faces drawn and gray and tight with the specific expression of people who have seen things they cannot yet process and are deferring all emotion until they are safe enough to collapse. A man in a Metra vest was at the platform edge. Not a conductor, maintenance maybe. He was shouting that the train was leaving in 5 minutes and going south to Joliet, and that from Joliet there were buses, and that anyone who was getting on needed to get on now. We got on. The train left at 10:48 a.m. It moved slowly. There was debris on the tracks in places. Objects I didn't want to identify, but it moved, and the sound of it moving, the sound of wheels on rails and a diesel engine pulling, was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. I sat in a window seat with Keisha next to me and Roscoe's bag on my lap, and I watched Edgewater slide past and then uptown, and then, as the train turned south and away from the lakefront, I could see distantly the lake itself. The lake was wrong. I don't mean this metaphorically. Lake Michigan, seen from the train as we moved south through the city, was visually wrong. Its surface was not behaving like water. It was smooth, not calm, not still in the way water is still on a windless day, smooth like glass, like skin. And its color was not the gray-green of March lake water. It was darker, and in places there were patches of that amber color, the same amber as the mist, and the patches were large. Some of them were hundreds of yards across, and they were pulsing. The same rhythm as the breathing, I pointed. Keisha looked. She looked for about 3 seconds, and then she looked away and closed her eyes and said, "Don't look at it." I looked away. South of the city, the world normalized in a way that felt like a lie. Suburbs gave way to exurbs, gave way to the flat southern Illinois winter landscape. And there were cars on the roads and lights and buildings, and it looked like nothing had happened. And the cognitive dissonance of that, of passing from the end of the world into a normal Thursday morning over the course of 40 minutes, was so severe that several people on the train were openly weeping, not from relief but from confusion, from the inability to reconcile what they'd just left with what they were now seeing outside their windows. Now I need to tell you about the decision, the one you're actually here to ask about. Joliet was a staging area. FEMA was there, actually there, visible, present, with tents and tables and bottled water and the bureaucratic infrastructure of federal emergency response deployed in a high school parking lot. National Guard too, HMMWVs and soldiers in mop gear that they'd partially unzipped because they'd been wearing it too long. Medical triage, registration tables, the whole apparatus. They separated us by building. Everyone from our address went to the same processing area. They took names, unit numbers, asked how long we'd been inside, asked if we'd been below the 4th floor at any point, asked if we'd touched anyone exhibiting respiratory symptoms. I said yes, not to the touching, to the condensation on the stairwell rail. I said I touched it accidentally, and they looked at each other, the 2 intake workers, both young, both visibly exhausted. And one of them said which hand, and I said left, and she said, "We're going to have you see medical," and they put a yellow wristband on me and sent me to a different tent than Keisha. That's when Keisha grabbed my arm. She said no. She said, "We are not being separated." The intake worker said, "Ma'am, it's just a precaution. It's a 30-minute evaluation. You'll be reunited at." And Keisha said, "I don't care what it is. We are not being separated. I am not letting him out of my sight." And the intake worker, a woman maybe 24 years old who had probably been working this table for 48 hours straight, looked at Keisha, and something in her face flickered, and she leaned forward and said quietly, "Ma'am, you need to let them evaluate him. If the yellow band clears, he comes right back. If you refuse, they're going to flag both of you, and that's a longer hold." Keisha looked at me. I said, "Go, take Roscoe. I'll find you in 30 minutes. She let go of my arm, and I felt the release of her grip like something being cut, and I walked toward the medical tent with my yellow wristband, and I turned once, and she was standing there, watching me go with a face I hope I never see again on anyone I love. The medical evaluation was not 30 minutes, it was 4 hours. They examined my left hand under magnification, they swabbed it, they drew blood. They put me in a curtained-off section with 3 other people who'd also received yellow bands, and we sat in folding chairs and didn't talk, and a television mounted on a pole played CNN, and the CNN anchors were now using the word event, without any qualifier, just the event, as if everyone knew what it meant, and they were showing aerial footage of Chicago lakefront, and what I saw from the air confirmed what I'd seen. From the train, The lake was wrong, the color was wrong, and the city itself was partially obscured by a low amber haze that sat over the near north side and stretched up toward Evanston. A doctor came to me after 4 hours, a military doctor, captain's bars, young, terse, professional. He said my blood work was normal. He said the swab from my hand had shown something, but they weren't sure what, and they wanted to keep me overnight for observation. I said I have a wife and a dog in the other tent, and I need to get back to them. He said he understood, and that she'd been informed, and that I could see her in the morning. I said, "Is there something wrong with me?" He said, "We don't think so, but we're being cautious." I said, "What was on my hand?" He said, after a pause that lasted a beat too long, "A protein we haven't fully characterized yet. It's not replicating. We just want to make sure." I spent the night on a cot in a medical hold tent with 11 other people. None of us slept much. The man next to me, Greg, from a building in Rogers Park, said he'd been in the hold for 3 days. He said they kept testing him and saying one more day. He said the people who were in the longest got moved to a different tent further back in the compound, where you couldn't see them from the main area. I decided at 3 a.m. Thursday night. Not decided, I should be honest. Deciding implies deliberation. I got up. I walked to the tent flap. The guard, a National Guardsman, maybe 20, sitting in a folding chair with his rifle across his knees, was asleep, not deeply asleep, dozing, his head back against the tent pole. I walked out. I walked across the dark parking lot of Joliet Central High School, past the registration tables now unmanned, past the rows of sleeping bag shapes under the gymnasium canopy, and I found the tent where Keisha was. It took me 40 minutes to find her. She was awake. She saw me come in and she stood up and her face did 3 things at once, relief and anger and fear, and I said, "We're leaving. Now. We're walking out of here and we're going south and we're not letting anyone separate us again." She said, "Marcus, your wristband." I looked at my left wrist. The yellow band was still on. I pulled it off. It snapped easily. "Just a paper wristband like you'd get at a concert," she said. "What did they find?" I said, "Nothing. A protein. They said it wasn't replicating." She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure. Let's go." We walked out of the FEMA staging area at 4 a.m. Friday morning. Nobody stopped us. The perimeter was fenced, but the fence was crowd control barrier, not concertina wire, and there was a gap near the bus staging area where a barrier had been moved for vehicle access. And we walked through it, and we were on a residential street in Joliet, Illinois, and it was dark and cold and quiet, and we were free in the way that only people who have walked away from authority feel free, exhilarated, and guilty, and certain that someone will notice and come after you, and equally certain that no one will, because you are not important enough. We hitched a ride south with a man driving a pickup who was evacuating his own family, wife, 2 kids in the back seat, bed of the truck loaded with Rubbermaid totes. He took us as far as Bloomington. From Bloomington, we got on a Greyhound that was running its normal route as if nothing had happened, and we rode it to St. Louis, and from St. Louis, we caught a bus to Memphis, and from Memphis, another one to Atlanta, and 36 hours after walking out of that FEMA compound, I was standing in Keisha's mother's kitchen in College Park, Georgia, drinking water from the tap, and the water tasted like nothing, and the air smelled like nothing, and Roscoe was eating from a bowl on the floor, and Keisha's mother was holding Keisha and crying, and I stood the sink and felt nothing. Not relief, not safety, nothing. That was as March. It's June now. I need to tell you about what's happened since, because you asked, and because the decision I made in Joliet has consequences that I live inside every day. The protein on my hand, the one that wasn't replicating. I think about it constantly. I've had blood work done 3 times since arriving in Atlanta. Once at a walk-in clinic, twice at Emory after Keisha insisted. Everything comes back normal. No anomalies, no markers for anything. But I think about it because here's what I've noticed and what I need to tell someone and what I can't tell Keisha because telling her would require me to say out loud that I might have brought something out with me, and I cannot do that to her. I cannot. My breath, in the morning, before I'm fully awake, in the first 10 seconds of consciousness, before my waking mind takes over, I breathe differently. Deeper, slower. The rhythm is familiar. It's the rhythm I heard in the stairwell. It's the rhythm I heard from Mrs. Adebayo and from Jason on the curb and from the 17 still people on the streets of Edgewater. When I'm awake, I breathe like me. But in the threshold between sleep and waking, for 5 or 10 seconds, I breathe like them. And the windows. Our bedroom window in Keisha's mother's house. Twice now I've woken early and seen condensation on the inside of the glass that I didn't produce. Thin even, covering the bottom half of the pane. Both times I wiped it away before anyone else woke. I wiped it away. The alert said, "Don't wipe it." The alert said, "Leave the room." I wiped it away because if Keisha saw it, she would know. And if she knew she would make me leave, and if I left, I would be alone, and being alone is the thing I cannot survive. Not after what we went through. Not after I already almost lost her in Joliet. So I wipe the window every morning. I check it at 5 a.m. before anyone else is awake, and if it's there, I wipe it, and if it's not, I go back to bed, and either way, I say nothing. And Keisha's mother's house is warm and safe and quiet, and we are 800 miles from Lake Michigan. And the news says the containment perimeter is holding, and the evacuation corridors are closed, and the event is being managed, and life goes on south of the line. But I stood at the window this morning, and the condensation was there, and I wiped it, and underneath, in the thin film of moisture, there were marks. Not smears from previous wiping. New marks, lines, parallel. Like something had pressed against the glass from the other side while I slept. Except there is no other side. We're on the second floor, and there's no balcony, and there's nothing outside that window but 6 feet of air. And then the neighbor's fence. I wiped it away. I went back to bed. Keisha was sleeping. Roscoe was sleeping. The house was quiet and warm, and I lay there, and I listened to myself breathe, and for the first 5 seconds it was wrong, and then it was right, and I cannot tell if the wrong part is getting longer or if I'm just more aware of it. I ignored the first alert. I silenced my phone at 4:47 a.m. and went back to sleep, and that decision cost us our home, our city, 2 strangers I could have saved, and 48 hours of the most terrible fear I've ever felt. That is what the decision cost. Us. But what I'm telling you now, what I'm saying into this recorder in this office, because you asked me to be precise, and I'm being precise, is that the decision I made in Joliet may have cost everyone else something worse. I walked out of medical hold. I walked away from observation. I walked out of the perimeter with a yellow wristband and a protein on my hand that no one had fully characterized, and I brought it 800 miles south to a house full of people I love. And every morning, I wipe the window and say nothing. That's what I need you to know. That's what the mistake cost us. And I'm telling you because this morning, for the first time, the condensation wasn't just on my window, it was on my daughter's. Keisha's mother is watching her right now. She's watching her breathe in her crib, and she says the baby's fine. And I believe her because I need to believe her, because if I don't believe her, I have to say out loud what I did and what I brought and what I am. And if I say it out loud, then Keisha will look at me the way I looked at Jason when he sat down on that curb like someone who is already somewhere else, already lost, already part of something that doesn't include the people who love him. So I'm telling you instead, I'm telling this recorder, because you asked for precision and I owe someone the truth, even if I can't give it to the people who deserve it most. I ignored the first alert. I wiped the windows. I'm still wiping them. And this morning, my daughter breathed amber.